Hey everybody, today I have a special treat. I have a super ultra vintage lens that's kind of rare, hard to come by. It is an Angenieux 20 to 120 lens. Check this out. This lens is a beast. It weighs about 12 pounds. It's actually larger than my Fujinon 20 to 120 by a margin and heavier. And it's got no power controls. It's a fully manual cinema lens and a PL mount. And this lens just has a really amazing look, and I chose it to shoot on a documentary project in which I started shooting it 25 years ago on 16mm film. That's a pretty amazing long trip and story. And I needed to shoot footage that would match back to it. And after a conversation with a friend of mine who happens to own this lens, he very, very generously loaned this to me so that I could shoot with that and do this project and get familiar with this lens. And it has me very, very tempted to make him an offer he can't refuse that I can't afford. Anyway, check it out. This has almost like a swirly bokeh going on here, like certain Ukrainian lenses do. It's a very cool, amazing vintage lens. The bokeh, if you look at the background, you'll actually see that magenta goes to one side and sort of a green-orange or yellow goes to the other. And this gives us a very specific vintage look. In fact, this lens was actually used, it was owned by Universal Studios. It was used to shoot a series of popular shows back in the 70s, like $6 Million Man and a few others. So this lens has a lot of history to it, and it was amazing to get to use this. An interesting thing I found when I initially put the lens on the camera using the PL mount, I had a lot of vignetting on one side of the frame, but not the other. And I thought this was a little weird. And then I thought about it for a minute and realized, well, a PL mount actually has optical centering, and that's not something that a lot of people are aware of, but you can center the lens that way. And so when I took the lens off, turned it 90 degrees, all of a sudden, the vignetting that was going on in the corners matched. Now, interestingly, I was actually shooting and framing for 4:3, matched back to all the archival material, so that didn't bother me. And at certain settings, like I'm doing right now, it's definitely not a problem, but it's something to be aware of. The other thing that really surprised me about this lens is it's a very low contrast lens. Now, back when this lens was designed and made, films were super contrasty, so what you wanted was a low contrast lens to dig into the shadows and pull the highlights down and try and get you more on that film negative. And on a modern camera, this almost works against you. So when I first put this lens on the camera, I set the camera up in C-Log 3 because, you know, that's what you do outside in high contrast, right? And literally, I was recording an image that was about 30 IRE tall. I mean, it was a skinny, skinny little bit of data on the waveform. And I'm like, this is crazy. I might be making an 8-bit image right now. So I flipped myself back to 709, and all of a sudden now I had about a 70 IRE waveform, and it looked nice and healthy. So that's what I've run with. I've actually shot everything on this lens in Rec 709, one or two different settings and things have changed, but basically straight 709 because I'm maximizing the gradation that's being recorded by the codec. And, you know, a little lesson I learned here. And that actually makes the images that come out of this lens super easy to handle in post because I've found that I've been doing very, very minimal color correction to just gently normalize the contrast a little bit, maybe play around with the color saturation. The other thing that I found with this lens is that it's very warm. I just preset white balance on 52 or 5600, and I found it was almost like putting like a quarter warming filter on the lens. So that was a very interesting benefit, I think. And unfortunately, I haven't had the time to try setting the camera to 3200 and putting an 85 filter on and see how that works out. That's pretty old school. So this lens is really kind of maximizing my dynamic range with some headroom left over to spare, to be sure. This lens isn't for every project. I mean, it's sharp, don't get me wrong, but it's not critically, clinically sharp like modern lenses. So you can tell, say, if I'm in a focus or out of focus, that's definitely noticeable, but how it falls off, what it does in the bokeh, how it spreads the image out, you can get a little bit of swirl sometimes. It's got a lot of stuff going on that definitely gives it an amazing vintage feel. Not for every project, and the vignetting, which happens between about 30 and 60 mil, could be a problem on some projects, especially if you need to shoot 4K DCI going all the way out to the edges of the frame. In UHD, the corners get dark, and they actually kind of also blur like some anamorphic lenses do. So, just be aware of these things before you decide that you want to take one of these lenses that's probably about as old as I am out on your next project. And a special shout out to SamCam in LA for hooking me up with this lens. Thank you. And am I going to send you a check or am I going to send you the lens? Am I going to send you the check or am I going to send you a lens? I get in trouble if I send a check, won't I? So that's it. I just wanted to give you some background about this lens and what it's like to shoot with, and that's it. I'm done talking. Just watch, because I think the shots speak for themselves. They're pretty amazing.